This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed.
The weekly wrap is the week in news and what's coming up. I'm Claire Kimball.
And I'm Jodie Speers.
Sussan Ley's election as Liberal Party leader led the news this week, so we'll start there. And then there's a bit to get across with world leaders on the move.
Particularly US President Donald Trump's Middle East trip and some disappointment over talks on a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine.
We'll also get you across the Diddy trial, and it's a special birthday next week.
And I've already bought the sweet treats in. Let's do it.
This show is brought to you by HubSpot. Their AI-powered platform is helping you accomplish more than ever before. And their Breeze AI agents handle all the busy work so you can focus on growing your business.
The most clicked link in the Squiz Today newsletter this week was an article about 89 banned baby names here in Australia. We're used to seeing those lists of the most popular 10 names, but not so much the banned one. Who knew there was this list?
Who knew? I think I knew that there were restrictions on names. I quite enjoy these stories when they do pop up from time to time because essentially it's a reflection of some of the names that people have actually tried to get registered and name their children, and officials have gone, nah, you can't do that.
Sadly, King, Queen, Prince and Princess are all out. Names linked to religion like God, Pope, Devil, Saint, they're blacklisted too. And Claire, unfortunately, product names like Nutella and iMac have also been prohibited by the authorities.
I reckon iMac Speers has a certain ring to it, but you didn't go for that, obviously. The other thing I learned about this is that there are such things as baby naming consultants, and this story, of course, was generated by one of those consultants, putting it all together, putting that list together and putting it out on social media. It did make me wonder, though, if many people do find it hard to find names for their children.
Look, I think if you're hiring a baby naming consultant, then you have far too much money and you're probably far too indecisive. You don't even need the book these days. Just hop online or hop on Instagram. And I found when I've got 3 kids, and after I had carried these babies and given birth to all of them, my husband was not going to argue on names. I was like, this is the name. And he was like, okay,
You've done the hard yards.
Exactly.
So you got naming rights.
Don't you dare argue.
Fair enough. The biggest story this week is election related again. A few things have happened this week. So the Albanese government has sworn in their new ministry. The coalition has confirmed their leadership in those two parties, along with the Greens. And it's Sussan Ley's election as leader of the Liberal Party that got the most headlines.
Yeah, according to Google Trends data anyway, she's the Liberals' first female leader and the first regional Lib to hold the position since Malcolm Fraser in more than 40 years. And it's been a big week of learning. We've needed to clarify the pronunciation because I'd been hearing Lee, then I heard you say Ley, and I thought, well, Claire's an Albury girl, which is where Sussan's office is. So she would probably know.
I should know, but I've been getting it wrong for 20-something years now. It's not Sussan Ley, it is Sussan Ley.
Like Key,
Like Key. I know Sussan as well from my time in politics.
Whoops.
So clearly she's put up with not just me but many people calling her Sussan Ley. But now she has corrected the record, and I guess she gets that opportunity when she's the leader of the party.
Yeah, once and for all. Her issues do extend beyond getting the pronunciation of her name right. The Liberals have a huge job ahead to rebuild the party, and that's where the term glass cliff got mentioned on repeat this week, and I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, we've learned a few things this week, not just about band names, but also about this glass cliff. It has been everywhere in the conversation about Ley's election. This is when a woman is appointed to a leadership position in a time of crisis to clean up the mess. The cliff bit is that it's almost impossible for anyone to succeed, whether you're a man or whether you're a woman, and that's because the problems that they're facing are so big.
Yeah, and the theory goes that when there's never been a woman before or rarely in that position and then they fail, they're not considered for leadership positions in the future because the thinking is, well, we tried that before and it didn't work.
Yeah, look, we're dooming her to failure. We'll have to see how she goes, I guess. A lot of that really depends, though, on how her colleagues support her. She didn't have a huge win over Angus Taylor, who was the other person that put their hand up for the leadership of the Liberal Party. He's a Conservative, so he was the Conservative faction's candidate. Ley is from the moderate faction. There's some very big policy issues to tackle, and that can lead to some pretty nasty factional fights.
Yeah, not just within the Liberal Party either. They are in with the Nationals, and there are questions to settle there about that coalition agreement, about how they will work together going forward. But for her part, Ley says everything is on the table when it comes to a policy review.
Before we move on, Jodie, it was a really emotional week for Ley. So after that win of the leadership in Canberra, she then had to hightail it back to Albury to be with her mother, who has been moved into palliative care. That happened last week.
Yeah, the timing never seems to be great, does it? In her press conference after being made leader, she said, "My mum is very sick, and on Mother's Day I called in to see her, and I thought that it might be the last time that I did." It made me think about Peter Dutton before that election debate, recently finding out that his dad had just had a heart attack and having to press on.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is, like, they're just people too who are balancing all of these very big things happening in your life, as we all have to do. Jodie, we mentioned the factions in the Liberal Party. It was a big talking point for the Albanese government as well this week with the confirmation of their ministry lineup. So Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles was the one who was singled out by the now former Industry Minister Ed Husic. Husic called Marles a factional assassin.
Yeah, he didn't hold back. Husic pointed the finger at Marles for his dumping and also the dumping of Mark Dreyfus, who was the Attorney General before the election. Marles is the target because he's the most senior member of the Victorian Right faction, and the men who were dumped were replaced by other members from that faction.
Yeah, those members, just to call them out, Sam Ray was one. He's now the Minister for Aged Care. He also has excellent hair. I'll
Good to
give
note.
you that tip. Dan Molino was the other one from that faction who's been elevated. He's now the Assistant Treasury. He's a bit follically challenged, just to call that out, but he has a PhD in economics from Yale. So his appointment to that portfolio has been talked about quite a bit this week because he is very qualified for that job.
I guess if you're wondering why this factional warring is an issue when it comes to a Labor government, it's the factions that actually decide who makes it onto the front bench. So PM Anthony Albanese has been given a list of people to allocate portfolios to. I don't think a lot of people realised that selection wasn't really his choice.
Yeah, it's one of those sort of quirks, I guess, and the differences between Labor and the coalition. So in a Labor government, you have a different process. You don't get to pick who's in your ministry. The factions do that, and that's what's played out this week. The Liberals go through a different process. The Nats tell the Liberals who their representatives will be, but other than that, the Prime Minister of the day or the leader of the day get to pick from the Liberals who goes into their front bench.
Yeah, Albanese does get to allocate the portfolios, though. He did that this week. And one notable shift was Tanya Plibersek moving from environment to social security. Some described it as a sidestep, but I think it's widely been seen as a demotion.
Yeah, she's still in the cabinet though, which is... She's a senior minister. She's at the table when it comes to the big decisions. But, yeah, it is a demotion. And the obvious question, I guess, for people who are following along and wondering why on earth there's an issue between Plibersek and Albanese, it goes back quite a way. They've known each other for 40 years and they've been in lockstep as both left faction members for a very long time, but there was a split in 2013 over the leadership of the party after they lost government. So it's just one of those things that have been kicking around for about 12 years or so now.
Yeah, awkward ever since. I keep thinking of that quite cringy moment during the campaign when Albo was doing the rounds of the audience and Tanya went over and went in for the hug and Albo instead went for the handshake.
Just this picture of Albanese sort of trying to catch her hands.
Oh, it's so awkward.
Before she sort of got close, she sort of
Stay back there.
caught her hands. A field day for the photographers. To round us off, just to come to a conclusion with all those leadership issues, David Littleproud remains the leader of the Nationals. That was decided on Monday. Loud voices in his party room who say that net zero issue, that policy should be abandoned. So that's definitely where a lot of the pressure is going to come when it comes to setting coalition policy. And the Greens have picked Larissa Waters to replace Adam Bann, who lost his seat, of course.
Yeah, she's the first Queenslander to be leader of the Greens, and she was an environmental lawyer, so that makes sense.
In the age of AI, you need business software that's easy to use and actually delivers results fast. That's what makes HubSpot's approach to AI so refreshing. Do more with less stress, thanks to Breeze, their suite of AI tools. Breeze agents handle busy work for you, creating marketing content and finding sales leads and handling customer service questions. And Breeze Copilot gives you the right info at the right time so you can always stay 2 steps ahead. Customers are selling faster and saving hours on work every week. Visit hubspot.com/AI to get started today.
Claire, to kick off what else was in the news this week, I reckon we should call this segment World Leaders on Tour. It's all been happening. Anthony Albanese is overseas for the first time since the election this week, and first stop was Indonesia.
Indonesia, our very important neighbour. He met with Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto. I don't think he gave him a bamboo bike, which was what the last president gave Albanese when he went over. That wasn't on offer, which is a bit sad.
Time.
Yeah, I don't know what the gift was. I'm sure it was lovely. So Subianto came to power last year. Human rights groups have warned that their rights are being wound back under Subianto, which was a really big watch out with his election because he had a very dark record when it came to human rights. But our Prime Minister has dismissed those concerns. He says that the Indonesian leader has overwhelming support among the people.
Yeah, the emphasis from these talks seemed to be on the warmth and the depth and the closeness of the friendship between our two countries. Keep in mind there was speculation recently about Russia trying to woo Indonesia and supposedly requesting to station warplanes at a base there.
Yeah, no wonder we're feeling very warm and deep and close because these are really big strategic questions and that relationship is really important. Albanese is not the only world leader who's fired up the jet this week. It's been a bit tricky keeping up with all of the itineraries, but let's start with Ukraine and Russia and peace talks in Turkey because there was such a big build-up to that.
Yeah, they were to be the first direct peace talks between Moscow and Kyiv in 3 years. There was speculation over whether Vladimir Putin would fly in person, whether Donald Trump would attend. Instead, in the end, they've both sent teams of representatives.
Yeah, and that's lowered expectations of any major breakthrough. Volodymyr Zelensky has previously said that he wouldn't take part in talks unless Putin was also at the table, and Putin didn't come to these. But Trump says that significant progress in peace talks was really unlikely until he talks to Putin in person.
Complicated. Zelensky did meet with President Erdogan of Turkey on Thursday night our time. He says that they should come back to Turkey for those talks when they're ready. Erdogan's involved in this because he does have good relationships with Putin while also being involved in Western forums like NATO. I guess it's that sort of geographic positioning of Turkey too. It's seen as being in between the East and the West.
Yeah, they straddle geography as well as relationships. But for the time being, no progress on ending that war, so that's where we're at. Trump and Ukraine's European allies said that they're going to impose more sanctions on Russia if Russia doesn't start getting involved in these things and taking it seriously.
As for Trump on tour, his visit to the Middle East has been action-packed, lots of multi-billion-dollar deals done this week. He also met with the Syrian leader Ahmed al-Sharaa in Riyadh. It's the first time a US and Syrian leader have met in 25 years.
Isn't that extraordinary? For all the issues that Syria has been through, and I know that they've been on the other side of, I guess, the troubles than the US, so there's been that distance. But yeah, incredible that hasn't happened. So al-Sharaa is the former rebel leader who overthrew Bashar al-Assad. Trump announced that he would lift US sanctions on Syria in an effort to try and help them get back on their feet. So that was really big when it comes to news. It was a really big development. Trump has also used his trip to increase pressure on Iran to restrict their nuclear program, threatening military action if it doesn't agree to do that. But he's avoided agitating them by not renaming the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, we talked about that last week, that Trump could make a statement that the US would refer to it as the Arabian Gulf, which is what Trump's allies in the region are after. Interestingly, the US president left Israel's leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, off his Middle East itinerary this week. That was seen as a snub, a sign of tensions between the two leaders, according to the commentators.
Yeah, there's been quite a bit written about that in the last month or so. Lots of speculation that Trump's very frustrated with Netanyahu, who seems determined to really push ahead with this military offensive in Gaza. Scores of people have been killed in Israeli strikes there in recent days. It doesn't bode well for possible hostage release and ceasefire deals, although there was the last American hostage released this week. The talk about that's because Trump was in the region. Certainly his supporters are saying that he was able to get that deal done. The humanitarian crisis, just the thing to clock, is really growing there.
Yeah, no aid has entered Gaza for 2 months. Israel has frozen all supplies of food, water and medicine, but there are hopes that those supplies will resume by the end of the month. That's been the situation since the ceasefire broke down.
And President Trump still has plans for Gaza.
Interesting plans.
Yeah. So late this week, he said that he wants the US to take Gaza and to return it to a freedom zone, which seems like a bit of a reiteration of his plan to take control of the territory and redevelop it into some kind of luxury tourist strip.
Yeah, that's how it's been interpreted. Moving on to the global economy, but sticking with the US president, Trump paused his massive tariffs on Chinese goods entering the US for 90 days, slashing the rate from 145 to 30%. China also came to the party, dropping 125% tariffs on imports from the US down to 10%.
We felt like we had to pick this one up because we've spent quite a bit of time in the build-up to this. So we had to cover off the walk back as well.
The huge walk back.
Exactly. Since announcing the tariff plans last month, Trump had been saying that the United States needed to stomach this sort of short-term economic pain to wean the nation off Chinese imports and build resilience in the United States economy over the longer term.
Yeah, according to the theory, prices would go up short term, but that would see local industry kick in to produce those goods for a lower price. That would create jobs and all those good things for their economy. Trump was adamant that China had more to lose in this standoff.
But then it seems that reality kicked in, and even the few weeks that things were in place, Trump's political base, so blue-collar workers like truck drivers and port workers, they were beginning to get organised and started warning that this near total stop in trade with China was hurting them already.
Yeah, there's some good reading around on what Trump's team had to do to get the president to back down. But when you read into it, he's announced and reversed heaps of things.
Yeah, a sense that this could just be his modus operandi, that this policy commotion is how one commentator put it, that he likes keeping people off kilter, that leads to the result that he wants. But his supporters say it does get results. But on this specific issue, what Trump says is an imbalance in trade between China and the United States. The fact is China hasn't given them any concessions to get them to walk back from it. So it's a 90-day pause. I guess we have to see how this movie ends. We're not there yet.
No. Also big in the news this week, Claire, we thought it was worth talking about the Sean Combs case, otherwise known as the Diddy trial. It has consumed New York City and much of the world this week. He's the American rapper standing trial on sex trafficking and racketeering charges. I don't think we realised quite how graphic and sordid and dark the details of this case would be.
I think in the lead up to it, you could get a sense that some pretty grotty stuff was happening, and clearly some, they're taking it to trial, illegal stuff. I must admit I'd never really heard of a freak-off until this case. That was Combs' term for these drugged-up sex parties that sometimes went on for days and featured his then partner. She's a singer by the name of Cassie Ventura. She took the witness stand this week and she really outlined this very degrading, humiliating experience of being Combs's girlfriend.
Yeah, we won't go into all the granular detail. You can look it up if you want the full picture. Ventura says that she was 19 when she first met Combs, very inexperienced and naive. He was 17 years older than her. She says that she went along to these parties because she wanted to make her partner happy, and then she says that she felt trapped because she was worried that he would release footage that he had of these parties and that would completely ruin her career and her reputation.
And Jodie, we were talking about how this fits into this sort of wider Me Too movement, which has gathered steam over the last decade or so. Obviously, each case will be judged on its own merits, but the common theme with many of these very high-profile trials is that powerful men are being exposed for behaviour which in the past they pretty much got away with.
Yeah, I feel like we're really living in a time of cultural change in this area. Even if Sean Combs is found not guilty of the particular charges that he's up on here, his own defence team admits that he's basically a violent domestic abuser. Pretty hard to argue otherwise when some of this violence was caught on CCTV.
Yeah, and that CCTV footage of him abusing Ventura is what really blew this up into a different sphere. You were telling me that a case like this also it says something about the power dynamics between women and these very, very powerful men.
Yeah, I think we're coming to understand that a little bit more through these cases. Diddy's lawyers argue that Cassie Ventura consented to these sex parties and that she stayed with Diddy in the relationship for a number of years despite his behaviour. But I think you need to look at that in light of this 17-year age gap. She was very young when she met him, inexperienced, and he held the keys to her career because she had a record deal with his company and also had that humiliating footage. So it's not as black and white, I think, as these things are sometimes painted.
In keeping with that wider Me Too theme, there was another very high-profile court case this week. That was in France, and it's 76-year-old Gerard Depardieu. He was probably the most famous French actor. He went into Hollywood culture as well with some big movies. I think a lot of people would know exactly who he is. He was convicted of sexual assault this week.
Yeah, in the same week that the Cannes Film Festival opened, which was interesting timing. That's where he has starred a number of times before. A court found that he groped two women on a film set in 2021 while saying obscene things to them. The victims were not the first to raise allegations against Depardieu for improper behaviour, but this is the first time that any claims have gone to trial, let alone led to a conviction.
Yeah, and as a news junkie, I seem to remember accusations against him for a very long time, like years and years back. So it's fascinating that this is the first one that's actually made it to court. He's been given a suspended jail sentence. He's been added to France's sex offender register. He says he's going to plan an appeal, but it's really sent these shockwaves through the French film world.
Big time. One of the headlines said, "The giants of cinema are no longer untouchable." Some say that France has been a little bit slow to join the Me Too movement, but it seems like it's getting there. Claire, we've been in some pretty serious territory so far this episode, so we wanted something a little bit lighter for what's coming up. Nothing particularly jumped out until I noticed happy birthday.
I know. So our podcast, the Squiz Today podcast, turns 7 next week.
I was mistaken when I saw this in the notes and I brought you a little birthday cake thinking it was your birthday, which is actually next month.
Burst into the studio with happy birthday. It's like, it's June, my birthday. And she's like, oh.
Too much excitement.
No, it's our podcast birthday.
Which is also exciting.
Yeah, so our podcast birthday, can't believe it's been 7 years of doing the Squiz Today. We are just so thrilled that so many people found the Squiz through our podcast, and a lot of people, we hear a lot, that were there right at the start are still doing the Squiz Today podcast with us most mornings.
I meet those people too. Yeah.
It's really
Hello
excellent.
to Danny, my friend from around the corner, because I didn't realise she'd been listening. She said I was an original Squizzer.
Oh, thanks, Danny. That's really cool. And thank you to anyone who has been along with us, whether it's for a short time or for a long time. We really appreciate you and all of your listens and connection with us. To move on, AFL's Sir Douglas Nicholls Indigenous Round is on this weekend. It's the 10th anniversary of that round. Clubs will be wearing their Indigenous-inspired jerseys.
And then one to set your alarm for Sunday, the Eurovision Grand Final kicks off at 5 a.m. Sydney time. You can watch it on SBS.
Australia's entry won't be in the Grand Final. They've already been knocked out. I'm reading from The Guardian. Gojo's sexually explicit ode to self-confidence and self-expression, Milkshake Man, failed to win over international audiences.
Shame that. We gave it some early judgment, didn't we? But hoped
Quirky.
it would come through.
Quirky, it was.
Also on Sunday, the Pope's inauguration mass is happening in St Peter's Square. Plenty of papal interest this week. Leo XIV was the most Googled news term in Australia this week.
Yeah, of course, coming off Friday last week and into the weekend about who is this guy and what is he about and what is he going to bring to that role. So, yeah, lots of interest in him, that's for sure. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will be attending that mass. I thought during the election that he might be a bit peeved that he wasn't able to go to the Pope's funeral because, as we know, he is a practicing Catholic and he has talked quite a bit about how his faith is very important to him. He's also going to use that trip to squeeze in a few meetings with world leaders while he's there.
Yeah, that includes the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. They'll likely be kicking off discussions about a free trade agreement between Australia and the EU. Also Mark Carney, the recently elected Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah, they're going to have a bit to chat about, I reckon.
I'd say so. On Monday, Qantas and the Transport Workers Union are back in court. That's for a 3-day hearing to decide how much the penalty will be for illegally outsourcing ground staff.
So Qantas, of course, dominated headlines for quite some time about a number of woes. One of those was this case from the union about the sacking of 1,700 workers who were let go during COVID. The courts found that those workers were sacked illegally. Qantas has already agreed to pay them $120 million in compensation. So this final step is this civil penalty hearing. Essentially a fine for that.
So who gets the money from the fine?
It's a very good question. Assuming that one is awarded, that the court does find that a penalty has to be imposed, the Transport Workers Union is the one that fine will be paid to because they're the body that has brought the case.
Yeah, right. On Tuesday, the 2025 International Booker Prize award winner will be announced. I always like to keep an eye on the Booker Prize.
So just to explain that, there's the Booker and the International Booker. So the International Booker are books that aren't written in English and they have that prize.
Oh, that's what's coming up.
Exactly.
Okay.
Not the Booker.
Not the English written.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's rate day as well. The RBA will hand down their first decision since before the election. That's on Tuesday. Most economists seem to be tipping a cut of 25 basis points.
Yeah, let's wait and see. It's always exciting when there's an interest rates week coming up. We know exactly what some of the news will be based on. Inflation is back within the Reserve Bank's target range of 2 to 3%. It's now at 2.9% for the 12 months previous. So essentially, let's see, it looks like things are starting to get into the range where those interest rates can come down. The International Monetary Fund trimmed their predictions last month. They forecast about 1.6% growth for the Australian economy. So there is a need to sort of fire things up a little bit and get things moving.
Yeah, right. A lot of that is linked to Trump's tariffs and the global uncertainty around trade at the moment. Also on Tuesday, the Victorian state budget will be handed down.
Oh, yeah, that's always an exciting day, isn't it, if you're in Victoria? So put that on your map. Friday, it's Vivid, which is Sydney's Festival of Lights. That theme for this year is Dream. So if you're around the Harbour Centre, you will see that start to fire up. Last year, it made us remember Kate had quite strong feelings about the festival. She wasn't really that excited about it.
She was a bit cranky about it.
Jodie, you're sort of around that kind of area.
Yeah, look, I think that this time of year in Sydney, we need something like Vivid because Sydney really sparkles in the summer. So you need something to look forward to. I think also the key is doing it a certain way. My neighbours get a boat organised and we pay about $30 each. We go out for an hour, take some snacks and wine, and the kids love it, but you're not sort of stuck out there for too long.
Snacks and wine on the harbour, I'd just do that. Doesn't matter what time of year it is.
With some pretty lights as a little bonus.
Yeah, beautiful. Moving on to our recommendations. So if you need, I feel like there's so much heavy stuff around, and we've just been through the election campaign, Trump's tariffs and all of the things that have been consuming attention. I just needed something not cerebral, nice and gentle.
Bubble gum for the brain, they call it.
To watch on the TV. And I came across a show called The Flat Chair. It was actually out a couple of years ago. It's based on a best-selling book by Beth O'Leary. It's just very nice. It's a bit of a rom-com.
Love that.
Yeah.
And I also quite like the things from a couple of years ago because you miss things along the way. There's so much that sometimes you've got to be reminded. I've got a recommendation I'm feeling now slightly guilty about, Claire, because I know that you're not into soup. And then when I thought it was your birthday and I was recommending a soup, I was like, oh, this is all bad. But think of this as a gift to your winter immunity.
Maybe to my gut biome.
Exactly.
I don't know. Nice.
It's got all the good things.
You're always thinking of me.
I'm very generous like that. Broccoli, leeks, zucchini, stock. It's really straightforward and it tastes surprisingly good because you include a bit of curry powder, so it gives it that kind of warmth and flavour. Lots of toast on the side, parmesan on top. Anyway, it's a JS Health recipe. Jessica Siepel, who's an influencer, I will put the link in the show notes.
Look, I couldn't be less excited, but I'm sure some people will find that very interesting.
I
will have a look at it. Look, I'll give you that undertaking.
Sounds very unenthusiastic.
Squiz Press, our first episode of The Call Sheet was out on Wednesday. We've had some really lovely feedback about it already. This series, of course, Kate had the News Makers series. We had a couple of series of that where we're talking to people who are either in the news or very crucial to how news comes together. We're extending that thought into the Australian entertainment industry. And the first person that Bryce Corbett, who is co-hosting that series, spoke to is Peter Grester. Of course, he was the journalist who was detained in Egypt back in 2013, I think it was. And it was on these trumped up charges of terrorism. He was convicted, but he's now back in Australia. He has been for quite some time. He's written a book about it and it's been turned into a movie.
Yeah, it's called The Correspondent and it's got Richard Roxburgh playing Peter, which is a great choice.
If you're going to, I'm fascinated, like, you know, that sort of dinner party game of, in the movie of your life, who would play you in a movie? I think if you're a bloke, Richard Roxburgh is probably a really good pick,
I agree. I heard a woman answer this question the other day saying Margot Robbie and I was like, oh.
That's a stretch.
We'd probably all pick her, wouldn't we?
Exactly. And look, Peter, it's a great discussion. Peter's very candid and thoughtful about that whole experience. What stuck with me about that conversation is this idea that he had to watch his own trauma play out on the screen, which was just the emotional toll of revisiting all of that in that very visual way. Next up in the series, we've got Mel McLean. So she's the brains behind some of the biggest reality television in Australia. So Gogglebox, which I love to bits.
Such a great show.
The Assembly, which was on the ABC, such a great show. Parental Guidance.
Yeah, Travel Guides as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, she shares how these shows cast people, the sense of responsibility that she feels for them and her perspective into why these shows work, which is quite fascinating in itself.
Yeah, exactly. So that episode is dropping on Wednesday. If you want to catch that Peter Grester chat, he is already in this News Club show. Just listen on. The link is also in the show notes. I think that's us done, Jodie, for another week.
I think so. Looking forward to next week.
A huge thanks to HubSpot for supporting today's episode. With their AI-powered customer platform, your marketing, sales and service teams can move faster, accomplish more and stress less.